Culture can be described as the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. This concept really highlights that culture is so fine-tuned to and so expressive of a particular group that it itself is almost an art. And this is definitely reflected in the Czech American culture by their way of life, customs, traditions, musical influences, festivities, and so much more. So today I'm going to be talking about the Czech identity and Czech culture. I chose to study the Czech culture because despite the depletion of many cultural and ancestral traditions, especially because America is a melting pot, sometimes those traditions get lost, the Czechs, and specifically the Czechs in Nebraska, have continued a strong legacy with many active members, especially in their young generations. I wanted to discover what kept them so active and so committed to their Czech culture, even as they adapt to American and westernized cultures and ideals. So today I'm going to talk about the concept I chose to apply to the Czech population, and then after going through my research, I kind of came up with two big picture ideas, which I will share, and also talk about my interviews and my cultural event I attended. I have selected the concept of integration to apply to the Czech population here in Nebraska. This concept, though simple, is very profound when it comes to this culture. Integration is defined by Martin and Nakayama in 2010 as the type of cultural adaptation in which individuals maintain both their original culture and their daily interactions with other groups. Integration can be found not only in the early history of the Czech American culture, but also now in the later generations of Czech descent. Integration is vital when it comes to Czech identity in the modern world. The Czech traditions and cultural pride have found ways to survive, while its members have also integrated into the modern American ways of life. This is an example of integration because you can see they wear their Czech t-shirts and their Czech pride, but are obviously very westernized in their physical appearances. The first big picture theme that I noticed was the use of very specific and intentional cultural practices. I would define this as placing meaning into these very specific cultural actions and traditions. For example, the Czech people do not eat a standard Christmas Eve meal. They eat the white meal. And this signifies the coming together of the rich and the poor. The meal consists of oyster soup, white fish, salad, mashed potatoes, and lots of bakery items. And within the oyster soup specifically, there are mushrooms and grain. And this signifies that both the rich, who had access to grain, and the poor, who had access to mushrooms, were necessary to come together to complete this meal. Additionally, they celebrate the feast of Saint Mikuláš, which is on December 6th, and as Darren, a 25-year-old Czech descendant whom I interviewed, says, the tradition is that on the eve of Saint Mikuláš, children will put out a pair of shoes and place a note for Saint Mikuláš in their shoes. The next morning, if the child has been good, they would receive fruit, nuts, or candy. If the child hasn't been good, they would receive coal. So these are just some of the specific traditions they have and they continue to carry out. Also, they're famous for all their bakery items, and they call this making bakery is how the women describe it. They're also very famous for their music, which consists of organs, clarinets, accordions, all these very famous instruments, which we will take a look at next. So here's an example of what a modern Czech band might look like, and you can see some of those instruments I mentioned are here. And we're going to listen to a clip called The Pretty Maiden Polka. The cultural event that I attended was a Czech funeral of a beloved figure in the community. His name was Mr. Nemitz, and his family was generous enough to let me come and take notes on some of their traditions and customs throughout the Catholic funeral mass. Some of them that I noticed was the bells ringing as the casket is processed down the aisle, and also there were a lot of Czech hymns sung throughout the mass. And the programs also had the English translations for those of us who did not speak Czech. And this church is called Sacred Heart, and it is a 140-year-old church just outside of Prague, Nebraska. And afterward, they had a small reception that included Czech food like pork sauerkraut and potato dumplings, as long as some dessert like kolaches and strudel. And I also learned a lot by attending this cultural event about sensitivity, especially when to ask questions, seeing as this was a funeral, But I also learned that the Czech are very warm and just very passionate and have a lot of pride about their cultural identity, even to the end. Here's a picture of strudel, similar to the strudel found at the funeral reception. And additionally, here are some pictures of kolaches. You can see they fill them with cream cheese, sometimes fruit, and these were also present at the funeral reception that I attended. Another big picture theme that stuck out to me was the cultural pride in the younger generation. I would define this as the feelings of loyalty and satisfaction in one's culture, as aided by the traditions, customs, and similar pride found by one's parents. Both of my interviewees displayed similar responses when I asked them if they ever experienced a time where they questioned or doubted having Czech as part of their identity, but they never did. Both expressed feelings of pride, connectedness, and active involvement in their Czech heritage. I have noticed after research that there are several Czech customs that surround the youth and aim to involve them. For example, when girls reach womanhood, they make a kroj, as it is pronounced, which is an embroidered and very individualized decorated type of apron. Additionally, they have lots of festivities, such as the Czech Days, which take place every year in Wilbur, Nebraska. And specifically one of those traditions is crowning the Czech Queen. Here's a sign displaying the Wilbur Czech Festival that takes place in Wilbur, Nebraska every year. And some of the traditions they have are dancing and probably dancing to the polka, and girls dress up in traditional garments, same with the men, and take part in dancing. One of the 100-year-old traditions is that of selecting a Czech Queen of Nebraska. You have to be at least 25% Czech and between the ages of 16 and 25. Darren, a former Czech queen, and the person I interviewed, pictured here, described to me the process, selection, and the duty of young women who run for queen. She says every year the chapters select a queen to represent their chapter and compete in a pageant for the Nebraska title. After the queen is selected, she is crowned and then the work begins. Outside of the pageant, the queen attends Czech festivals to celebrate the heritage. The pageant has been taking place for over 100 years. It is in the younger generation where I saw a lot of aspects of integration. Ian, a 22-year-old half Czech and also my second interviewee, describes some of the challenges of integration. He says, "There are some stereotypes that go along with small Czech towns. Drunks, too many inside jokes, and homely women, but I am not ashamed." He went on to say that he is able to integrate well because of being raised in both the Czech and American ways of life. For example, he grew up in Lincoln and so was exposed to a big city and modern ways of living, but would also make frequent trips with his family to Prague, Nebraska, where his grandparents still lived a very traditional Czech way of life. It was there they cooked special meals, made kroys, spoke in Czech, and partook in other customs and traditions. In this way, the two worlds were kept fairly separate, although he states that he was never ashamed if one spilled into the other. Above all, Czechs have true cultural pride. Darren, one of my interviewees, said to me that the point of being Czech is to go out into society as future ambassadors to perpetuate the heritage, culture, and traditions of the Czech people worldwide. So it is evident that the young generation are not only being taught their culture, but are empowered by the task to share it with the world. I've really learned a lot through this investigation of this specific cultural group. Mainly, I have learned that intercultural communication requires sensitivity and astute observation to be better understood. I think I became a better listener, observer, and note-taker through this process. This is a culture that is really just in Lincoln's backyard, and I learned how diversity is not only found overseas.